Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Hopefully you are in the right place today. We're actually going to go through a combined webinar of how Splunk and Varonis can give you a holistic monitoring overview for both your security, IT infrastructure, and pretty much everything in between there. If you haven't met me before, it's lovely to virtually meet you. My name's Grace Maher, and I head up our support and pre-sales teams over here at Somerford Associates. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Bradley Bosher, over from Varonis, who's a senior sales engineer over there. Bradley, do you want to give yourself a little intro?
Sure, thanks very much, Grace. Good morning, everybody. As Grace says, I'm a senior sales engineer at Varonis. I've been with the organisation 4.5 years or so, and I've been working with Grace and some of her colleagues at Somerford for some time now. So thanks everyone for joining.
Wonderful, thanks, Bradley. So today's agenda, just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover, we're going to give you a very quick intro into both Splunk and Varonis. I know that we have some of our current Splunk customers on here today. You may also be customers of Varonis right now, or you might be looking into it, or potentially maybe you guys are a Varonis customer looking into Splunk. So we'll give you a good overview of both. We're going to review today's threat landscape and how that might be changing due to the current events. We're going to go through a couple of attack scenarios and how Splunk and Varonis can really nicely work together to help you investigate and triage those incidents. And of course, show you a holistic approach to security. So I just wanted to go over really how the threat landscape is obviously changing, and really just have a conversation between Bradley and I about potentially, why Splunk and Varonis may fit together in this. Now, obviously, we both have experience from different areas. I myself with a lot of Splunk customers, and yourself, Bradley, with Varonis. But I think one of the main ones from my side, just to start off with, obviously with the landscape changing so quickly now, obviously due to coronavirus, we've got a few customers who are very fast tracking their migration to a cloud deployment, or even running right now in hybrid deployments, which is often perfectly fine and working correctly. But there is obviously that inherent security issue of, you kind of expect when you are setting up something for it to be inherently secure. And that can sometimes become then a secondary thought of, wait, have we actually checked that this is secure? And there are quite a lot of issues, at least with some of my customers, around remote working and really securing their users from home. And I know that one in particular that really comes to mind is where they were facing issues where they had to put so many different multi-factors and sign-on methods in place to get them to actually into the network to be able to review their data and access their applications, that it got to a point where people just ended up driving into the office to do something anyway and then coming home, which obviously is a much larger problem in of itself. So you can always see, as we always say, if you make it too difficult for the user, they'll always find a way, even if it means driving into the office to go and grab that file that they needed rather than accessing it from home. So Bradley, I'm sure that you have a couple of examples from maybe some customers Varonis side, but that's definitely with Splunk. It's been quite an interesting one where we were monitoring that and seeing them all of a sudden drop off from their home and then see them pop up in the office, and you can see them just download that one file and then come back home, which is obviously a much longer process in terms of what they're doing, but also quite unproductive, so to speak.
I was going to say it's not the most efficient mechanism of working, is it? So yeah, over here at Varonis, we're seeing a very similar story. I think it's fair to say, the vast majority of our customers are working with a hybrid model. But most of those, if I was speaking to organizations in January, would have probably said, whether it's Office 365 or other kind of cloud deployments for their data, it was in an early stage and maybe it was going through some testing. Maybe IT teams were leveraging it, but they hadn't moved the rest of the business up there. And then what we saw come probably late March, early April, is organizations going through a rapid digital transformation. one customer I spoke to, because I mainly work with their financial services, and they are, traditionally are very office-based organisations, where the majority of their employees are in the office, 4.5 days a week on average. And they said that they had a 2-year digital transformation program plan to migrate users to the cloud and allow for more collaborative remote working, and they basically had to do that entire program of work within a 2-week period to ensure their business continuity. And as you say, just the very nature of having to accelerate a piece of work has meant things had to be, corners had to be cut. Security did have to take a back burner, because ultimately, if business continuity wasn't managed properly, that the business wouldn't be able to operate. So naturally, security had to be a bit of a backseat. And now, what it seems like about 3 years, but it's probably 4 or 5 months of the new normal. I think organisations are acknowledging that the business continuity has been achieved, and now it's a time to address some of those security holes.
Definitely. It's so interesting that pretty much all customers are almost facing similar problems, even if they're just kind of surfacing in different ways. And it's really cool that obviously Splunk and Varonis can help them in many different ways. So I think, Bradley, now would be potentially a great time to hand over to yourself, just to really go through, obviously, maybe some remote working risks that obviously you guys have isolated from Varonis there. I know that you have some reports, some really great stats as well, which are a little bit scary, so I will warn the people on today. So they might think, oh my God, all my users are going to do something awful, and really just go through that.
Sure. So over at Varonis, we have an incident response team, and then some of the stats that we'll present in a moment have come from their analysis of kind of the first quarter trends, and some of these are just the more anecdotal observations. So as we've just said, the switch to an almost 100% remote workforce for most organizations mean that a lot of them have now either no visibility or less visibility into understanding who is accessing their internal network and ultimately the data stored within. Traditionally, data that may have been, very well restricted in terms of, it sits on a kind of a traditional network share. You weren't allowed to take data out via USB sticks. It may have had some kind of classification policies in place to restrict its movement. Has now, just by its, very need, been moved into cloud repositories where the controls are much more complex, and potentially data is being unknowingly exposed or compromised. And because IT and security teams have had so much work to do with the vast majority of additional VPN traffic, as one example, there's a lot of noise, and it's very hard for those teams to understand which alerts potentially are relevant, and how to properly triage those. And because of all of these various things, we've seen a higher rate of successful attacks in 2020. And here's the breakdown of the types of attacks that we're seeing within our customer and prospective customer base. And the one that, as you can see from the bottom there, that has really grown this year is the brute force attack. It's obviously been around for some time. It's nothing new. It's nothing particularly clever. But because of an increased move to cloud services, we've seen a lot more unintentionally exposed servers. So something that I see time and time again is a server that's been stood up in maybe Azure or AWS, and then and completely unintentionally the RDP protocol is exposed to the wider internet rather than just within that organization's domain, which obviously makes it susceptible to these types of attack. And then the second one I want to talk about is the cyber criminals and APTs. We're going to run through a couple of examples, and these are very much something that I personally have seen a lot more frequently, especially within the UK customer base that I work with, where essentially they're leveraging some of our fears around COVID-19 and using these for some quite sophisticated phishing attacks, followed by some more kind of persistent threats. Thanks. So, for those of you who may not be familiar with Varonis, we're a data security platform that's very focused on your unstructured data repositories. So, whether that be on-premise with your kind of traditional Windows file servers, your maybe your NetApp, EMC, NAS devices, and then more recently we've seen that huge shift to data being stored, primarily in the UK market, at least within Office 365. We're also interested in looking at the supporting critical infrastructure, your Active Directory, both on-premise and in the cloud, as well as those ingress and egress technologies that give us a bit more context into how users are entering and taking data out of the organization. Moving on to what we actually do with all the information we collect is we understand what type of data is held within these data stores. So we perform content classification on the files. We want to understand ultimately what is sensitive data that's important to the business, whether commercially or for regulatory reasons. We build up an identity map through your Active Directories to understand exactly what users have access to what types of data. And then we layer a series of access activity across the top of that. So the file activity gives us insight into which users are interacting with which data types, and allows us to build up an understanding of their normal behavior around this information. And then the Active Directory and the perimeter telemetry gives us that richer context to be able to provide insights into how users are gaining access to that data and how they may potentially be taking it out of the problem. So as I introduced just a moment ago, brute force attacks is something that we've seen increase drastically this year, and it's absolutely the most common type of attack we see. If Grace, you can move on to the next slide for me. As I said, there's kind of a few different avenues of a brute force attack, and some of those are kind of intentionally exposed web surfaces. So here we're looking at an example around Office 365. Just through the very nature of using those services, your organization's attack surface has been increased. So, really think it's important to have as much monitoring as possible around these technologies to try and identify where brute force attacks, for example, have been successful, because you can guarantee they're going to be happening. So Varonis employs a series of behavior-based alerts. In the screenshot here, we're showing you one around geolocation hopping. So we want to understand what is the which geolocations a user is accessing the data from, and then giving an organization insight into where it's unrealistic that a user can travel from, for example here, Israel to the US. And where Varonis really helps organizations reduce not only the time to detection, but critically the time to response, is providing a full story around what that account and potentially that device has done following a successful compromise. So here are a list of the kind of alerts that we might see following a successful brute force of a VPN. And you can see there, the three highlighted ones are allowing a security analyst to quickly and easily understand what type of data has potentially been affected, which will allow them to decide, well, firstly, is this a concern and a priority? Has this potentially this account potentially been compromised and then accessed sensitive data? And then critically allows the organization and their analysts to understand if commercially sensitive or regulated data has been impacted, exactly what files and folders have been compromised, to allow accurate reporting. Something I think we've seen over the years is following a data breach, organizations not necessarily being able to pin down exactly how many, in the example of personal data, how many members of the public's information has been exposed. So by having this context and being able to understand what has been impacted, should the worst happen and the data be successfully exfiltrated, the organization can at least isolate it down to the critical files and those users and those individuals that are referenced within.
And here's how pretty much a similar event would be reviewed in Splunk. And I think this is how we can really show how Varonis and Splunk work together so wonderfully to give you that alert style view inside of Varonis, and obviously showing you in relation to your data, specifically, what files have been touched very quickly, and also what type of regulated data was within them. But just taking a view from reviewing a security posture from Splunk side, and don't worry if you are not a current Splunk customer and wondering what's going on under the bonnet, I will go through that later on. Here we can see just to the left that there is being some brute force access behavior detected. And if we look into those events, we can actually see here, for example, that we've got users signing in from multiple workstations at very excessive rates, over 150 sign-ons an hour, very high. I don't think that Adam or any of those guys have been on holiday lately and forgotten their password, let alone their last name. So it definitely looks like something untoward is going on. And this is how you can see how those same issues or those same threats can be reviewed in something like Varonis to give you that context behind what data has been touched if they've been able to get in, and also, what content the data has within it. But you can also then just do your further historical investigations or just do your normal pattern matching or trending analysis, taking the data from both Varonis, taking the data from your IT infrastructure and those raw events, and obviously being able to get a holistic view that way by obviously getting your up to the minute alerts in either Splunk or Varonis, being able to get that additional context of the data from Varonis, but then of course feeding that all back into Splunk to really learn from what's happened before and hopefully alert you a little bit earlier next time to any unusual behavior happening, obviously with the additional help from Varonis highlighting where data stores might have been touched that are obviously not normally touched by that user, for example.
That's great. The second common type of attack we've seen in 2020 have been advanced persistent threats, typically instigated by cyber criminals, but also nation states. One of the kind of the first phases of such attack is establishing that command and control center, often via a phishing email. As I said, cyber criminals tend to be, and nation states tend to employ and leverage some intelligent people. They understand that the very nature of the world in 2020 means people are more fearful and maybe a bit less circumspect when it comes to unexpected emails. What we've seen is emails like the one in the screenshot that talk and look quite convincing and look to provide the latest safety updates. If we think back to in the UK when we were getting our daily briefings, it was not uncommon to be getting corporate type updates on the policies. Another one I've seen is around redundancies or salary cuts, where they're preying essentially on the employee's fear of potential issues with their employment, and users who would normally spot and mitigate against this kind of phishing attack have clicked on malicious links, or in this case opened up malicious documents and enabled the macros within. These screenshots are from an actual investigation one of my colleagues was doing in France earlier this month, and this is the kind of activity that Varonis is able to detect and alert on based on your DNS traffic. A domain generation algorithm is typically leveraged by malware to rapidly generate and connect to new domains, so that from a kind of a mitigation perspective, it's very hard for the organization to simply block a malicious IP or domain name. Varonis understands what the normal looks like when it comes to your user accounts and what domains they're reaching out to, and understands that in this particular case, those essentially kind of gibberish domain names are unusual and can help alert to that type of activity. And then, much as we discussed in the previous example of an attack, the really critical bit is being able to then perform that full forensic investigation and start to pivot around that account and that device to understand what other activity that device has been doing, because clearly it's been compromised. We as an organization now need to understand what the scope of that compromise is, and how isolated it may be. And I think, Grace, as you've mentioned previously, this is where you could potentially perform that first stage of investigation using Varonis, and then we can move into Splunk. You have that holistic picture of the entire infrastructure.
And that brings me so nicely on to holistic monitoring and how we can achieve this, obviously, from Splunk side by not only getting in your raw events, but by really enriching this with those amazing Varonis alerts, with that rich intel on, what type of data was in there, what type of user was it, when have they accessed, what have they done with it. And of course, when we are dealing with complex data from many different locations, the traditional approach, if you were trying to do this using a hardened database or system, really just isn't up to the job anymore. Now, this is because previously, obviously, data didn't often change. We relied on relational structured databases. We really relied on those heavy integrations to be able to correlate up that data. But where Splunk is a little bit different, and where Varonis is too, is the fact that we really adapt to that digital evolution. We completely don't mind if your data is messy and unpredictable. We know it's going to be messy and unpredictable. Machine data is always a little bit messy and unpredictable. And of course, it needs massive scale. You may go from overnight, having hundreds of workers in the office to hundreds of workers working from home. And you need a tool and a system flexible enough and quick enough to adapt to those readily changing circumstances. And of course, you may not always know which questions to ask of your data. If somebody's asking you, 5 years from now, will you know exactly what questions you want to know from your data? The answer should be no. And if anybody is, making you do that ahead of time, then of course, when you do want to do those ad hoc queries, do that, real-time investigation, it starts to become very, very difficult. Now, this is where Splunk actually comes in. And sorry, I'm just going to jump back a few slides there. Just to give you a bit of an overview of really where the platform fits into this from Splunk. Now, don't worry, I won't give you a crash course in Splunk architecture. I know it's a Friday morning, I'm not that mean, but I just wanted to give you an idea of obviously how Splunk is working to correlate these events under the hood, as Brad gave an amazing overview of how Varonis is obviously able to give you these really rich insights and alerts in real time of your data there. Now, Splunk is a completely holistic data platform that's able to ingest any human readable data from any location. I always say I've really nearly been working with Splunk for 6 years for my sins, I say. And in that time, I've never had to say no to a data input. It's always been where there's a will, there's a way of doing it. Now, this obviously allows you to get in data from hundreds of different sources into one centralized location and have a single pane of glass view into all of your on-prem, cloud, and hybrid applications, hosts, and services in one place. Now, you can search this data to create dashboards like I showed you previously with that security overview dashboard there, or do ad hoc queries like when I was reviewing Adam Jerry signing in from different workstations 150 times each. Now, you can also do scheduled reporting and real-time alerts as well, and even feed those alerts into other tools, such as Varonis Data Alerts. So having Splunk raise new alerts for you, as well as feeding in the original data alerts from Varonis itself. Now, this really allows you to really get that true holistic monitoring style view. And this is because you're able to obviously have that flexibility of the very verbose search language with Splunk to monitor your log files, your infrastructure, and your applications. But you can also get this extra kind of layer of well, I would call it metadata or context from that data, from the asset that it was from, or even, the threat model that it matched against from Data Alert there. And I know, Brad, you've got a few kind of, I guess, best practices for getting that holistic monitoring set up there and really kind of engaging the Data Alert platform and obviously the edge services, etc., from Varonis into Splunk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've covered it already very well. So really, what we want to do as Varonis, from a threat detection and response point of view, is give you as complete a picture as possible. So by feeding in our kind of context-rich alerts to Splunk, it enables you to quickly and easy, again, broaden that search and understand what other activity those devices and accounts have performed within your environment outside of Varonis's data-centric view. And Grace, as you said, we absolutely believe in a layered security model. My belief is that if you have 3 or 4 security products in place and 3 of them raise a very similar alert, that is the best possible way that your security team is going to know what needs to be prioritized and where action needs to be taken. If only one system is alerting, that's maybe an indicator of a lower priority event. And as I'm sure many of the attendees have experienced, it's simply not the human resource to investigate each and every alert. So the fewer high fidelity alerts we can provide, the better our chances of detecting those attacks earlier on in the kill chain and mitigating them before data is exfiltrated or potentially some kind of denial of service is performed is that much higher.
I totally agree, Bradley. It's amazing to see that we're even from such different worlds of working with just general events in any form, and also then specifically on data, we still have the same threads. We're still reviewing the same information, just in such different ways. That by combining them, you really do get such a true holistic picture that you can obviously triage those events in such a quick time, hopefully, that it should really help your security teams, or even if you're not able to have a security team currently, enable, your IT staff to be able to start doing some of that security investigation with a lot of context, a lot of help, really the best tools for the job. So I know that we've probably given you a lot of information in a very quick fire manner. I wanted to open up the floor to any questions that you might have, either on Splunk, Varonis, or combined. And if you don't have any questions and you are thinking of hopping off, I did just wanted to thank you so much for joining today, but also just suggest that if you are looking to get a little bit more insight into Splunk or Varonis, please do take advantage of our workshops and webinars. We have them all published on our website. More than happy to show you guys where on the events page they are just after this. And that way you're able to get a hands-on approach, of both Splunk, and you can also see, how you can get Varonis alerts into there. And that way, obviously, you'll be able to make sure that you can test it for yourself. For some of you guys who are a Splunk customer on right now, I would definitely suggest for you to take advantage of Varonis's amazing offer to do a free data risk assessment. It will allow you to see where you have data, even if you think it might not be somewhere else. It will also allow you to see how much of that data is critical and what nature it is as well. So a really, really great tool to take a good baseline of kind of what state you're in now, and obviously then review what you are looking to do for the future. So if you guys do have any questions, please pop them through. Brad and I are more than happy to answer any and everything. And I always say, no questions are stupid questions. So please feel free to ask anything and everything.
As Grace says, it's a good opportunity if you've got questions specifically around Splunk and Varonis integration. I really hope we'd be able to answer that between the two of us.
So we've got a question here, Bradley, and I think it might be one for both of us. We have integrated the Varonis platform with our Splunk using the Windows Event Collector, where the Splunk agent pulls the traffic and gets it into Splunk. But we are facing issues with the technology add-on. Okay. I would suggest, first of all, from a Splunk side, that the Varonis alerts are best to pull in using the data alert TA. If you are using that one rather than the Windows event log. But obviously, if you would like to use the Windows event log, likely you may need to do some source typing there. But Brad, I don't know if you have any suggestions from Varonis side there in terms of getting the logs out, apart from the data alert stuff.
I guess my only comment there would be absolutely, please leverage the data alert mechanism to feed into Splunk via the syslog format. We have a template out of the box, so it should be very light touch on your side. But if you have done that and you're still experiencing issues, just feel free to reach out to whoever your SE is or the support team, and I'm sure we can get to the bottom.
Definitely, and I've just sent you our support email as well, so please feel free to shoot us an email over there as well. I'm more than happy to help. Got another one here, which I think is for you, Brad. Which feature of Varonis does the DNS monitoring?
Yep, good question. So we have a part of the platform called Edge, and this is the module that does the DNS monitoring. We also capture VPN and proxy information with that same capability. Currently, I don't know what DNS you're using, but I'll give you currently support Microsoft DNS and Infoblox. And as with, if it's something that you haven't come across previously, once again, we'll be more than happy to provide a risk assessment, leveraging that technology, so you can get insights into your DNS traffic if it's not something you've been monitoring historically.
We just got one saying thank you in return for that, and we've also got another one here saying, is it possible to report on the file folder copy events within Varonis?
Sure. So the short answer is yes. The roundabout answer is there's no, from an operating system perspective, there's no such thing as a copy event. That event, I think, it does exist in Office 365, but it doesn't exist in a more traditional NTFS file system. What we would see is a file open event. So my advice to my customers is, if you want to understand if it's likely a copy event rather than just someone actually opening the document, is to look for where you've got a large number of open events within a short space of time. So, for example, if you see 100 documents opened within the same second, the chances are that's a copy event, as opposed to someone actually opening the file.
And now we're on fire with the Varonis questions. Are there any plans for Varonis to monitor things outside of the Microsoft ecosystem?
I can't speak about that because that would be a roadmap question. As a public company, we can't make commitments to that without an NDA. But at the moment, we, from a cloud perspective, look at, as you said, the Microsoft ecosystem and also Box events and activity. If you do want a bit more information, then please engage with us kind of directly, and we can discuss our roadmap under that NDA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brad. I think that's the end of the questions that we've got so far. But again, if you guys do have any more, please shoot them through. While you do, I'll just show you guys actually how to get to that part on our website for the workshops and webinars. I know you may have already registered and seen this, but some of you guys I know register straight from LinkedIn, so I thought it's definitely worthwhile showing you where to go to. But if you just go to somerfordassociates.com, click on our events page there, you can scroll down down and review events by partner. So if you're looking for specific ones on Varonis or Splunk, you can then jump down and see the specific workshops and webinars available there. Again, all of these are completely free of charge. So if you are looking to get a little bit more knowledge or work more with either Varonis or Splunk, then definitely is worthwhile, taking up on these webinars and getting obviously as much kind of knowledge and insight as you can. And obviously with the workshops, you get some hands-on time as well, which is always really useful from both the usability side and also, getting used to administration as well. Okay, I think they're all questioned out. If you guys do have any others that you think of after, I'll go ahead and pop my contact in the chat box there for you guys to reach out. More than happy to field any questions that you might have, even if they're on Varonis. If I don't know the answer, then I've got Brad, and I know he can answer them for you. He knows everything on Varonis pretty much, or maybe I'm setting the expectations too high, Bradley. But for me, you know everything about Varonis. So if you guys are questioned out, no more questions, again, I'll go ahead and pop my email in the chat box now. Please feel free to reach out if you want to, either for questions or if you do want to arrange one of those demos or either a free data risk assessment. Please take a look at the data risk assessment part on our website under Varonis, and that way you'll be able to review what it actually contains. But pretty much it's just taking a baseline of where you are now, and obviously that way we can see, how things are going and where you can improve things. Thank you everyone so much for joining us on this rainy Friday morning. Hopefully we've taught you a little bit more about both Splunk and Varonis, and hopefully how they can really give you that next level of security awareness and investigation. Again, any more questions, please feel free to shoot them through to myself. And really just thank you so much for joining today. And thank you so much, Bradley, for joining us from Varonis and, giving us a lot of knowledge and answering a lot of questions there on Varonis.
No problem. Thanks, Grace, for having me. And thanks everyone for attending.